Outside, the night thickened with cold and damp, as though the marsh itself had risen from the ground and begun to breathe at the height of one's face. The wind scraped along the fences, swelled through the gnarled ash trees, and slid across the rooftops with a whistle that asked no permission. Inside the small parlor of Laburnam Villa there was resistance, quiet, determined, shutters drawn, curtains heavy, a fire alive, spitting red logs, and a heat that clung stubbornly to the walls. The air smelt of clean ash wool tobacco, and the faint thread of whiskey evaporating from a glass in the corner. Family portraits, darkened a little by age, watched the living from their frames, their painted eyes full of courtly curiosity, as if waiting for someone to finally say something beyond dispute. Father and son bent over the chessboard. The pieces, worn smooth by long use, gleamed faintly at the corners, betraying decades of battle. Mr. White played with a kind of reckless patience, a man who began with bold ideas and ended in needless danger to his king. From time to time, Mrs. White would pause her knitting, peering over her spectacles at this silent theater of small wars. The needles clicked, the wool ran, her movements as precise as her housekeeping. "Listen to the wind," said Mr. White, hoping to distract his son from the fatal error just made by his own hand. "I'm listening," replied Herbert, his young face bowed over the board, his hand moving with the impiety that sons reserve for fathers in trivial matters. "Check." "I doubt he'll come tonight," murmured the old man, hovering a palm over the board as if warmth might alter the field of battle. Herbert moved his rook, a stroke as clean as it was cruel, and softly declared, "Mate." Silence. Only the fire stirred and the wind outside struck invisible hands against the face of the house. Then Mr. White burst out, his voice suddenly sharp, the frustration larger than the game itself. "That's the cursed side of living at the end of the world. Mud to the knees, a road turned river, and neighbors who think that because there are 2 houses here, no one else should matter." "Don't fret, dear," said Mrs. White, her tone warm as honey, strong as iron. "Next time, it might be yours." The old man looked up, and that rare smile of age, half guilty, half tender, played through his gray beard. He caught the spark that leapt from his son's eyes to his wife's, and for a fleeting second found grace in losing. The gate creaked. Footsteps pressed upon the night. The sound crossed the garden, kissed the doorstep, and stood before the door. Herbert tilted his head. "There he is." Mr. White rose in a burst of hospitality, and before his wife had time to gather her needles, was already opening the door to a tall figure framed in the storm. Broad-shouldered, face flushed with cold, eyes small but alive. A presence that seemed to have crossed continents just to fit within their parlor. "Major Morris," he announced. The major greeted them with the heavy hands of a soldier and was seated by the fire, where the warmth licked his boots and dried the scent of rain and leather. Mr. White brought whiskey in glasses, set the copper kettle on the grate. Its low hum filled the room, softly guiding the words that had not yet found their way. By the third glass, the major's story shone, like coins passed from palm to palm, wars that looked like maps drawn in blood, fevers with names that twisted the tongue, creatures whispering the names of gods, temples so ancient that the very stone remembered man. Herbert listened wide-eyed, as though the fire itself were painting the scenes. Mrs. White gasped and smiled, her eyebrows dancing to every brave account. Mr. White drank steadily, unsure whether he was drinking the whiskey or the world he had never seen. 21 years, said the old man with the pride of friendship and wonder. He left almost a warehouse boy. Look at him now. I've not done too badly, the major replied, though the smile he gave was tired, as if each tale had cost him something unseen. The talk rolled naturally as stones roll downhill, to India, to marvels, to strange beliefs. Then came the name that held the air still. The Monkey's Paw, murmured Mr. White. The major drew breath before answering and held it. Nothing, he said abruptly, or nothing worth the telling. Mrs. White's curiosity sharpened. The major sighed, for he knew some silences are safer locked, but sometimes they yield. He reached into his coat and brought out something that changed the room's temperature. At first it seemed a joke, then doubt, then quiet horror. A small shriveled hand, fingers curled, nails pale as splinters, the skin dark and dry, carrying the smell of oldness, as if dust itself had remembered time. A fakir, he said slowly, a holy man. He placed a spell upon it to prove that fate rules over men and those who meddle must pay dearly. 3 wishes. For 3 people. Mrs. White drew back slightly. Herbert leaned closer, touched the thing with his fingertip and shivered. Mr. White took it gently, as one might lift a spider's web, trying to see where the spider lived. Why not make 3 more wishes, Major? Herbert grinned, teasing. Because I already have, said the other quietly. And the 3rd was for death. The whiskey rang faintly against his teeth. The fire hissed, and for a moment it seemed the only living thing that knew the sound of discomfort. No one laughed. And if they did, it was inward, a laughter afraid to be born. I once set fire to it, said the major suddenly, and with a single motion threw the paw into the flames. Mr. White, quicker than thought, snatched it out, shaking it as one might shake a living creature. Better to have let it burn, the major murmured darkly. If you don't want it, the old man began. I don't. And don't blame me for what follows. Throw it on the fire like a sensible man, Mr. White slipped the charm into his pocket. The room exhaled, and supper resumed the task of courage. They ate. They drank. They listened to one more tale of India. For a little while, things felt almost normal again. The kettle humming softly, the knife against bread, small talk warming the cold stone of the night. Later, the door closed behind the major. The last train swallowed his figure. The room felt larger and emptier. Herbert broke the spell first. If the hand's as true as the tales, we've no need to believe in it. Did you pay for it? Asked Mrs. White, her gaze more on her husband's blush than his words. A trifle, he murmured. He didn't wish to take it, and told me again to throw it away. Herbert laughed softly. Then we'll be rich, famous, and wretched with too much wishing. Father wished to be emperor, so you won't be ruled by mother. Mrs. White snatched a cushion and chased him, laughing. The monkey's paw lay dark upon the bright table. Mr. White picked it up again, turned it over thoughtfully. Herbert's hand rested on his shoulder. 200 pounds, he said, half serious, to pay off the house. That's all that's missing, isn't it? Mr. White blushed, as though caught confessing a superstition. He raised the charm. Herbert sat at the piano and struck a grand chord, half mocking. I wish for 200 pounds, said the old man clearly. The chord filled the air, a curtain rising. Then, a breath, and then Mr. White's cry, short, startled, sickened. It moved, he whispered. The paw slipped from his hand, hit the floor with a dry, coarse sound. Mrs. White ran to him. Herbert picked up the paw, smiling. "I see no money," he said lightly, "and I dare say I never shall." The night deepened. The wind roared above the house. Somewhere a door clicked by itself. Mr. White sat awake, uneasy, thinking of locks, of exits, of neighbors, and most of all, of what he did not know. They slept, some sooner, others later. And so ended the first act of that pact, which might never have been made, had men known the true worth of silence. The winter sun slipped through the window in a timid shaft, as if asking leave of a grief that had not yet learned to sweat. Herbert, playful, made sport of last night's fright, as one might tease an old dog that has never bitten. The parlor, washed in light, felt prosaic, safe, factual. The paw, abandoned upon the sideboard, seemed only an unpleasant bibelot. There was crispness in the bread, lightness in the laughter, and the morning reclaimed every habit with a ravenous hunger for normality. "Retired soldiers are all the same," pronounced Mrs. White, gathering the plates. "And we, fools that we are, to heed talismans." "If the 200 pounds do arrive," Herbert quipped, "the worst that can happen is a sack of coins dropping on Father's head." He kissed his mother quickly and wrenched open the door with that excess of force young men believe they owe to timber. Mrs. White walked him to the gate, looked down the muddy road, lifted an arm in farewell, folded the smile away as one folds a letter, and returned. The morning ran on a thread of tasks she knew by heart. Mr. White smoked with the gaze of a man looking inwards. The postman brought papers that were not checks. He brought a tailor's bill. He brought the stubborn habit of the world not changing. "It moved, I tell you," the old man insisted at luncheon, half brusque, half pleading. "It was only a sensation," the woman said, firm and tender, that conviction wives hone to save their husbands from themselves. Then they saw him, a man outside, hesitating at the gate, pacing back and forth. Well-dressed, a new, glossy hat, polite manners, and a discomfort like fever. 3 times he turned away. The 4th, he mastered himself and knocked. Mrs. White hastened to straighten her apron, to smooth her hair. Mr. White opened the door with the caution one brings to a surgery, afraid of good news that might undo a life, and of the other sort that confirms it. "I come from Ma and Megan's," the man said, after a brief cough that seemed designed to hide the sound of his heart. "They asked me to call." The words came in a rush. Not for lack of schooling, but because the news was too much for any one mouth at once. Mrs. White's fingers tightened on her apron, and then she felt them slip. "Has something happened to Herbert?" "Badly injured," said the man, voice low, "but he feels no pain now." For a moment the phrase was water on a split tongue. Mrs. White thanked God. And before the word had properly formed, she was already collapsing beneath the weight of its second half. She stopped breathing. When she drew breath again, it was as if she swallowed iron. "Caught in the machinery," the man added, studying the floor as though the sentence were written in the rug. "The firm is deeply sorry. They accept no liability, but in consideration of his services, they propose to offer—" The figure that completed the arithmetic of terror rose between them, and none dared touch it. Mr. White's dry lips moved. The question came out like a blade. "How much?" 200 pounds. The answer cracked the silence like timber splitting. Mrs. White screamed. Mr. White smiled a smile that was not human and fell, heavy, to a floor that seemed unwilling to take him. The visitor, still a young man, aged 2 years before he left, and the house kept the scent of street and headed paper after he was gone. The burial was held 2 miles away in the new cemetery, a field the wind scoured by duty. They went and returned with no body to carry, no words to warm, only that sequence of gestures that are born tired from having been done too often. Open, sign, close, kneel, rise, accept the shovel's throw of sand from unfamiliar hands. They came back with the new weight of an absence. Herbert's chair by the window became only wood and shadow. A week passed. The house, once small, was now far too large for two old people. Talk grew scarce. The minutes made the sound of a clock that does not forgive. In the small hours, Mr. White woke certain he had heard footsteps in the passage. Mrs. White, certain that a voice had called her name. And if by chance they came down to the kitchen together, there was always something out of place. A door they did not recall locking. A spoon turned the wrong way for no reason. One of those nights, the old man reached out and found he was alone in the bed. The house trembled with the wind, but there was another sort of weeping. The sort only husbands recognize, because they have heard it first on the wedding day, again at the birth of a first child, and once more when there is no one to fetch from school. Mrs. White stood at the window, small against the curtain. He asked her to come back. "It is colder for my son," she answered. The old man sat on the edge of the bed and made the reckoning he had been chewing in silence. There was still one wish. And the wish, like certain illnesses, takes the house before it takes the person. He went downstairs with his heart in his feet. The parlor was a cutout of darkness and memory. He sought the shelf. The talisman lay where he had left it, quiet, patient, waiting for human greed to do what its nature could not. "Bring him back," begged the woman, distraught, gripping him by the wrists. "Bring him back." "He has been dead 10 days, the old man said, each word a step downwards. "And I could not spare you this. I knew him only by his clothes." "He is my son," said the woman oak, with the bright blindness of those who love beyond their own measure. And she pushed him along the passage. Wish. Mr. White felt the talisman colder than he remembered. The little hand shrunk, bristled his skin like metal laid upon the tongue at the height of winter. He wished to say it was madness. He said it, but the air returned the words as if they belonged to another house. He raised the object, and the wish came out like a rope being hauled in the dark. "I wish my son alive again." The charm slipped from his hands. The candle nearby burst, flared, and died. Mrs. White ran to the window and threw up the blind. The night thrust its face into the room and stayed there. The old man, broken by an aching relief, returned to bed. They did not speak. They heard far off a rat running within the wall, a stair that complained of not being stepped upon, the house breathing for the first time after a long drowning. And then politely, as if asking leave, the first knock sounded at the door. It was light, almost a mistake. The old man froze. The box of matches slipped from his fingers. Another knock, and another, stronger. Mrs. White rose with an agility not hers for years and cried her son's name, as if the world had been invented for that moment. Her husband caught her by the arm. "For God's sake, don't open it." "It's Herbert," she said, not even glancing at him. "Herbert has walked. It's 2 miles, he's late. Let me go." Another knock. The chain rattled, the great bolt groaned like an old beast. Mrs. White fought the iron fought fate, and fate fought the man who, on his knees upon the parlor floor, groped for a small, dry hand. At last he found it in a crack between the skirting board and the leg of the sideboard. The object clung to his palm as if it had always belonged there, and with a wounded voice, the old man uttered the third wish. a wish no one heard entire. I wish. The lock surrendered, metal against metal, with a final snap. The door opened as though it were opening for the very first time. Mrs. White, breathless, pulled it wide, and the night came in entire. The black road, the wet field, the lampless post, the trees doubled in shadow upon the ground. There was the smell of the marsh, and a chill that, touching her face, seemed to beg her to step back. She called her son's name twice, 3 times. Each call, less voice, more memory. Nothing answered save the wind now dragging itself through the leaves, like something alive. She stood there a few seconds, made of expectation. Then she lifted a hand to her mouth, as one tastes a broth one is unsure of, and pushed the door to, slowly, her chest rising and falling without permission. She went upstairs without a word. Mr. White, still upon his knees, did not move. When at last he did, it was with ritual care. He rose, leaned upon the arm of the chair, and looked at his own hand. The monkey's paw was gone. In the days that followed, silence gained texture, as though one could touch it and leave fingerprints behind. The new cemetery 2 miles away received visits that carried no flowers, only footsteps uncertain of their place. Mrs. White ceased her knitting. Her hands lay in her lap, as if awaiting needles that refused to come. Mr. White stopped smoking his pipe at the old hours, began again at others. The house, now and then, still made the sound of a distant door closing. Now and then a rat, now and then nothing, and the nothing there was everything. The Major, who never returned, remained a rumor none cared to deny. One colorless morning, Mr. White rummaged through drawers, cupboards, boxes, searching for the charm upon shelves, in folds of curtains, in the coat pocket he had worn that first night. Nothing. Some nights he woke sure he had heard an object fall into the hearth, and would hurry down, finding only ash and faint embers, as though he had arrived too late for whatever had happened. Mrs. White no longer spoke of wishes. By day she said nothing. By night, when the wind touched the boards again, her lips would open slightly, and a name would spill out as gently as water into an empty glass. Mr. White pretended not to hear, a courtesy owed to both the living and the dead. One ashen afternoon he went to the cemetery, stood without the words he had spent a lifetime learning and now forgot. He noticed the world was made of small things, grass choosing one direction or another, bark peeling from a tree, a stone that might have been another stone under different light. When he returned, at almost evening, he saw that the front door was merely ajar. Mrs. White slept in the armchair, her fingers interlaced in her lap, her head fallen to one side. Wearing an expression of such fragile peace, it could not have borne the weight of a single tear. He closed the door with the care of a man who knows the measure of things, drew the chain, tested the bolt. The fire, with one last spark, gave him a final glow. Mr. White stepped to the sideboard and, by an impulse he did not recognize as his own, opened the lower drawer. The wood groaned. Inside there was nothing, but a nothing shaped precisely like a hand. He pressed his ear close and, by a whim of wind or memory, swore he heard, from very far away, perhaps 2 miles distance, 3 knocks, one light, one firmer, one so strong the panes thought of breaking. He did not move. Mrs. White breathed deeply in her sleep and smiled a smile wide enough to hold a boy with grease-stained hands. The night entered through the crack, signing its presence. The house, once a stage, was now a chamber of echoes, and the echoes there had the honesty of things that do not explain themselves. Next day, as in all the days that followed, Laburnam Villa woke in the same place, the road remained muddy. The postman knocked with his usual lack of ceremony. At some moment the knitting needles took up their work again, slower now, but with a tenacity that seemed grateful to matter for obeying. The pipe was relit, and the smoke, curling upward, drew, for the last time, a simian face in the air, which vanished before a shiver could be borne. As for the paw, it was never seen again. Some said the major had returned and done at last what should have been done that first night. Others said that certain things, once their purpose is fulfilled, dissolve from within and leave behind only a pocket with the shape they once possessed. And if anyone asked about the knocking at the door that night, they received the answer that spares both the living and the dead: the wind. And if they hoped for another and more consoling or more cruel, they learned to live with the lack. For in the end, what remains in a house where 3 wishes have been spoken is not what entered, but what was kept from entering. And that, for those who dwell in remote places, is sometimes all that can be called mercy.